So this is all about stories, right? I mean, that's what our lives become. And the story of this arc is ultimately the story of this particular gentleman by the name of Morrisville. And Morrisville was originally born in the city of Cobrin. I've seen it spelled Kobrin and Bryn, 1860 of the present day country of Belarus. Cobrin was roughly 200 miles as the the crow flies from Kovna, which is where pretty much most of Burlington's Jewish community came from. It was a city of about 7,000, small town of 7,000, roughly 2/3 of the population was Jewish in the 1840s, 50s, 60s, presumably when he was born and was raised. It was originally part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It was subsequently a county capital. It was a good place for Jews to live. And that pretty much continues until the 1880s. The assassination, traditionally, when we talk to kids, we tell them about the assassination of the Tsar Alexander II in 1881, and Jews essentially being targeted as scapegoats. They were to blame for the assassination and subsequently the massive sanctioned pogroms that begin or grow, extensively during that period, begin to encroach upon Belarus as well as other areas. And it is no surprise, as we well know, between 1880 and 1920, I mean, roughly a half, some would speculate even more, of European Jews leave Eastern Europe and travel to America and other places. So his departure in 1886 from his village is not surprising. A bit odd, though, is that when he comes to America, of all places, and we haven't gotten there yet, we don't know, but he goes to Middlebury, Vermont. I don't know why. There's no evidence or ever reference of family members in Middlebury, so it's hard to know why he comes to Middlebury. What we know is that he arrives in 1886. He's 26 years old. It will take him 2 years before he can pay passage for his wife, Fanny, and then his two sons, Barnett and David. So they'll join him in 1888. The family, incidentally, will eventually grow into 7 children. According to Myron Samuelson's book on Burlington Jews, he becomes a member of Chi Odom, interestingly enough, in 1890, all the while that he resides within Middlebury. He is characterized as a tinsmith by trade, but he seems to have found employment in Middlebury with a gentleman by the name of Alan Calhoun. And he works in Calhoun's hardware store during his early stay. It's very clear that he's a go-getter. He's not your average run-of-the-mill guy. And I was talking to Michael Wool last week, and Michael shared this document with me that I think underscores the notion that this guy had plans, he had vision. In 1894, he applies and successfully receives a patent from the U.S. Patent Office. It is specifically stipulated for a holder of brushes. When you open the piece up, there's a one-page description of this particular object, and the picture that's illustrated shows you that the holder basically, drives in and clicks into the brush. And that enables you to use the same holder for multiple brushes. According to Michael, family lore stipulates that this was the original Fuller brush design. No indication that Morris made money from it, but still a cause for a certain celebration. It's tiny, it's probably illegible. I should have taken a better picture. Morris Wool at the bottom signs his name next in 1894. And that probably is a pretty strong indicator that he can't sign his name yet. And he hasn't learned enough English, or at least writing, cursive writing, to write his name. 1896 is a pretty significant year for Morris Wool. After 10 years, he can apply to become a naturalized American citizen. And at the same time, he decides that he's gonna go out on his own. And he announces in the Middlebury newspaper that he is doing, quote, all kinds of work in tin, copper, galvanized iron stove fitting, unquote. And he promises to save you 25 cents on the dollar if you come and visit him. We'd like to think that he did well for himself. But a few short months later, in February of 1897, his venture apparently collapses. Brief newspaper report stipulates that he has, quote, closed up his tin and hardware store and removed to Burlington, unquote, where he has found employment. Burlington makes perfect sense, does it not? I mean, he obviously knew of Burlington, and it was a much greater, more thriving community. And again, the pieces aren't altogether clear, but there seems to have been an opportunity that arose for him at a business, a local business in Burlington called AC Hawthorne. It was a roofing business. And what we seem to have found is there's reference to the owner's ill health and the need for someone to come in and help with the business. And so Morris Wold joins AC Hawthorne in 1896. Continues to be successful, develops a partner, a fellow by the name of H.H. Solis, and the two of them receive another patent on a metal snow guard. And I do not have that patent. I will get it. We will find it, and we'll learn more about it. But it's a pretty good indication that in 1910 the business is doing well. The fact of the matter is, in 1916, however, that Wool and Solis announce a parting of their ways, and the partnership is dissolved. And essentially, Morris will take over as a solo owner. Bear in mind, at this juncture, the description of the business is that it's doing well. Later on, in a retrospective on Wool's life, there's reference to the fact that AC Hawthorne, under his tutelage, becomes, quote, one of the largest roofing businesses in all of New England, unquote. I think a testimonial to his work ethic. As the sole proprietary owner, he notifies the public that you will find him at the same old stand that he has occupied for so many years. He is now purchased as the sole owner. What is interesting as you look at the newspaper is that advertisements indicate by 1920 he's expanded his inventory from roofing to modern home furnaces. And again, all strong indicators that he is a very, very successful man. Should point out, and I didn't incorporate this because I was rushing to get this done the other day. But all the while, he has become quite entrenched as a leader of the Burlington Jewish community. And when you go through the newspaper reports, interestingly enough, on an annual basis, they report, who are the officers of the synagogue, who's in charge of the Hebrew Holy Society, who's in charge of this, that, whatever. And Morris Wold clearly demonstrates that he's part of the upper echelon, that he's really made it within Burlington and become very successful. So now we come to this object here, the copper heart. We know what the inspiration is. And the inspiration essentially comes about as a consequence, sadly, of the death of his wife, Fanny. On November 30th, 50 years of marriage, she passes away at the age of 68 from pneumonia. Her obituary describes her as, quote, well known in Burlington and respected for her acts of charity and benevolence. Her obituary acknowledges a family of 5 sons, a daughter, 18 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. One of the sons incidentally passed. She is described as quite a remarkable figure. In her will, later on, there's this tiny little article that mentions the fact that she has made a number of bequests to Jewish institutions, both in Burlington and Palestine. It's kind of an interesting feature. $200 to the Hebrew Free School, $100 to OZ, $25 to the Hebrew Free Loan Society, for aged men in Palestine, and the Hebrew Ladies Aid Society. We have all of their records in our vaults. So the great core question is, how does the copper arc come about? So how does, you're fine. How does the copper arc come about? And since we know that she is the inspiration, we'd like to know more, but the reality is, at this point in time, we have not found any information that indicates why Morris Swope chose to create an arc in her memory and her honor. It's a source of future conversation. Just so you know, after her death, he continues to run his business. He is described at 85, still working on a daily basis as quote, old reliable. And his work really extends throughout New England. I spoke to Michael and others who described it, a number of things. I mean, he did the Vermont State House dome. He did tremendous number of steeples and local churches in the area. In fact, a family piece of family folklore I learned from Michael's sister was that she had a recollection of the story being told that when he was doing a local steeple in Burlington, he was very clear to put Logan David and family names on the interior of it to signify that it was his work. In addition to being vital and vibrant in his work, he marries. In May of 1931, so roughly 6 months after Fanny is gone, he marries a woman by the name of Mary Sheehan. Not a Jewish name, but she's married at the synagogue with Reverend Flax, that's the rabbi. He does in fact divorce her roughly a decade later. And oh, there, and the final piece is that he subsequently, at the age of 80, marries a third time. And this would have been in 1942. Now, Michael couldn't be here. I asked him to come, and he was in New York, but he said, I will share a couple stories with you. So I'm hoping this comes through.
Sorry, as a young lawyer, I'm now retired, but in the early
Not coming
'70s,
through.
when I was starting my practice, I got a call from Bob Borger, who owned, it was the leader of Evaporator in St. Albans, Vermont. They were a major player in the maple industry. He called me, and they had used other law firms. It was a big employer in St. Albans, and said, I'm going to use you, Mike, because of your great grandfather. So, drove up to St. Albans, met with Bob, great guy. I think they're older than me. He said, sit down, young man, I'm going to tell you a story. The story is about your great grandfather, Morris, who did a lot of work with us. He was very instrumental in the creation of that.
Sorry, I'm sort of hoping that that comes about. Let's see if that works. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Operators. He was a tinsmith, worked with his hands, tin, copper, take milk cans, whatever, copper roofs, that was his thing. And he was an Orthodox Jew who dressed and acted like an Orthodox Jew, with the payas, the beard. He was also incredibly strong, with forearms the size of most people's thighs. Anyway, Bob said he was doing his route with the milk cans and with working with the maple people, the evaporators. He was up in the townships in Canada, and he was in Quanticook. And it was after a day's work. He basically was surrounded by a number of lumbermen, French Canadian lumbermen, who kind of were smitten with the myths of what Jews were all about. They were scared, basically, but it was, horns, the drinking the blood of Christ, killing Jesus, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, they were kind of taunting him. He was in the middle, and he just, Beauregard said to the end of the story quickly, he said he was at the end, he was the only person standing. There were a number of bodies on the ground around him. He then picked them up, dragged them into the bar in Quanticook and everyone else there, and bought them all drinks. He drank bourbon. Anyway, that was the type of person Morris was.
And sorry that that wasn't as loud, but here's the final story that Michael shared.
Who was a revered physician in Burlington. Was everyone's family physician on Maple Street. When he was a young doctor, he took care of Morris. And Morris had this habit, he loved bourbon, he drank bourbon straight. He said, you can tell a man by the way he drinks his bourbon, you don't mix it with anything. Anyway, when he was in his 80s, he went in to see Bump, and Bump said, Morris, you just have to cut down, you can't drink as much bourbon as you're drinking. And Morris, in his integral way, solved the problem by, instead of putting milk on his cornflakes every morning, which he had, put bourbon on the cornflakes. Morris outlived Fanning. And I know that, according to my parents, that he held me when I was a baby. When Boyle did his work on me, which would have been 1946. Anyway, I hope this was helpful.
And Morris does in fact die in 1947. He's 86 years old. So that's the story of the fellow who created this.